Yakuza. Known as Like a Dragon in Japan, it's definitely one of the most prolific video game series to come from Japan. It is one of Sega's biggest franchises and has arguably become the face of the company, and in the last few years has grown up a steady fan base after Yakuza 0. However, I've been playing this series for well over 5 to 6 years now, seeing about it many years ago, and being quite intrigued by it. And here we are many years later where seemingly everyone knows the Yakuza games, and it's one of Sony's bigger exclusives. Or at least it was. So as a decently long fan, or at least longer than the general fan at this point, I thought, why not rank all the Yakuza games? So this will be the definitive list of the Yakuza games. My top 10 Yakuza games. This is obviously the 10 Yakuza games that have actually come out in America, and as of the time of this video, there are still few games that have not made it over to the West, such as Ishin and Yakuza 7 Like a Dragon. Also, this list is in 2020, which is current year, and I'm 1000% certain there will be tons of more Yakuza games, so eventually this list will probably be outdated. Like I just said 20 seconds ago, we still have Yakuza 7 Like a Dragon coming out, hopefully by the end of this year in the West. Also, a quick shout out to Fist of the North Star and Judgment. Both of these play very similar to Yakuza, especially Judgment, but are not in the series. Recently just finished Judgment, thought it was pretty great as well. However, you won't be seeing a review of the game, since most people who watch my videos don't seem to care about these. I will say though that for a majority of the games on this list, I have actually reviewed them extensively in depth, so I'll have links in the description to both videos when I reviewed a majority of these games. Enough messing around, let's just get right into the list. At number 10, we have easily the worst of the Yakuza games, and that is Dead Souls. This game is actually a non-canon spin-off that came out after Yakuza 4. The game bears little resemblance to the main series, in all honesty, as it's not really open world at all, there's no beat-em-up combat, and the story is pretty stupid all around. The game sees a zombie monster outbreak in Kamurocho, actually, where the whole city goes into quarantine from this outbreak, and well, it's just strange. You fight some really strange monsters in this game that are stripped right out of Resident Evil. You actually fight with guns as opposed to hand-to-hand, so you go around shooting up all the zombies and other weird monsters as 4 characters actually. You get to play as the main series veteran Kiryu, Yakuza 4 newcomer Akiyama, Yakuza 2 villain Ryuji, who has a robot arm, and for the first time in the series Majima. So this was actually his first playable debut, but it's not exactly great. The game becomes really repetitive quite fast, as there's not much to do besides shoot zombies. The shooting is terrible with some really awkward controls that just don't make like any sense. You would think the game would control like a normal shooter, but it doesn't. It is some really awkward controls. The scheme that it uses is just difficult to get adjusted to, and it's just extremely cumbersome. On top of that, the story is pretty dumb, the conclusion isn't very satisfying, and it would actually go on to be such a commercial failure that Sega for a time decided Yakuza wasn't coming to the West and would stay in Japan. It was only when Sony pushed for them to bring it back that the series came back to the West. So screw this game for almost killing the series off. At number 9, we have the original Yakuza on the PS2. Yeah, the original really just doesn't stand up to the rest of the series anymore. I actually played it before Kiwami came out, and even then, it was really having trouble standing up to some of the later games in the series. While it was humble beginnings to an extent, the game has aged quite poor. The story was one of the shining points of the game, as I thought it was actually pretty great. It was a really interesting, never-before-seen story and setting, especially for the time. But the real standout for me in the original version was the music, which I still think is arguably the best music in the whole series, along with the original Yakuza 2. Seriously, like all the tunes in the game are really bumpin'. And while the graphics were so-so and the world of Yakuza was just getting started, the reason it's so low on this list is the combat. The combat in this game is aged horribly and is just a dreadful experience nowadays. You can't change direction mid-combo like those very early Dynasty Warriors games. But those games came out in like 2001. This was 2005. That's just totally unacceptable, and I remember getting very frustrated with a lot of the fights in this game. The heat moves, while being introduced, weren't implemented very well, in all honesty, either. It's interesting to see nowadays that the series is blown up, to see where it all started, but that's really all it is nowadays, is just a historical purpose, because it's the first game. It's still better than Dead Souls, and it's certainly more memorable, but all around, it's not very great. At number 8, we have the third game in the series, Yakuza 3. This game is definitely the black sheep in the entire main series. Like the original game was the original, it was the first one. They were still working everything out. The combat wasn't exactly great, but this was the third game in the series, and I just think this game wasn't as great as it could have been. I think even the previous game was better. Don't get me wrong, This game is okay, but it's nothing more than okay. The combat didn't really see an improvement from Yakuza 2 at all and felt a bit clunky still. There were some marginal improvements, but nothing substantial enough that's even worth bringing up. The heat moves, basically your super moves that are supposed to be like the most devastating moves in combat, if you didn't know, were exceptionally lame, I thought, and arguably the worst in the whole series, aside from the original. The story starts out more than interesting enough with Kiryu and his orphanage, but it quickly devolves, and the plot twists that are in the game are just not very exciting at all, and I thought the story was rather quite weak. I would say that it might be the weakest story in the entire series, I'm not even kidding. The side content was decent enough at least. The graphics on the original PS3 version were horrible, especially for when the game came out. I legitimately thought there was something wrong with my TV when I first played the game because it was so pixelated, blurry, and low quality. But no, that's just the original game. The PS4 version, which I have not played, seems to look a bit better, but the original version just looked terrible. As a whole, the game is just alright, but it's certainly the game that stands out the most in the series in terms of quality from the rest, but a necessary step for the franchise. At number 7 we have Yakuza 2, the original. While running on the same engine as the original game, and not only looking a bit better, but it plays a lot better than the original game. Like I brought up earlier, it has the best music in the series by far, in my opinion, as it just totally kicks ass. The story is just amazing, and is my second favorite story in the series by far, but this game is the best villain in the series, hands down with Ryuji Goda. It just felt like such a great extension of the first game, and I didn't think the first game was, well, all that special. The story was awesome on all fronts, the new location Sotenbori was a worthy addition to the series, the side content was even better as well. While you can actually change direction this time during combos, it's quite nice. It still felt a bit janky and is hard to come back to though, that's for sure. Fortunately, the heat moves in the original Yakuza 2 are arguably the best heat moves in the entire franchise. I'm not even kidding, they're just ludicrous. So awesome that clipping and graphical issues show up, making them look even more vicious than they should. I love the heat moves in this game. This game would be higher on the list if it wasn't so hard to come back to all these years later. Additionally, the game has gotten pretty pricey in the US, and yeah, it's probably not worth playing when Kiwami 2 is out. Overall though, it's still a pretty good game with an amazing soundtrack. At number 6 we actually have Yakuza 6. This was the first game in the series to run on the new current engine as of 2019. The game would return to the roots of Yakuza and have only Kiryu as the playable character and Kiryu alone. The combat would also become a bit more streamlined as well. The combat was good in the game, that's for sure, and it felt pretty nice. The heat moves were decent enough, and you got into some really high-scale fights in the game. The story was interesting enough, as Kiryu is just old as bones in this game, and, well, it starts out incredibly interesting, but I think it loses its way a bit in the story. The conclusion was all around really good, but it wasn't the best conclusion ever, or anything close to that. Some of the new characters introduced were nice additions to the series as well, and Kiryu has one or two hilarious interactions with them. The game introduces a new way of leveling up that I was not personally huge on and preferred how Yakuza 5 and 0 did this. They added a pretty neat eating mechanic though to this game. The sub-stories did have their shining moments, but overall they weren't as memorable. Also, the game was considerably shorter than any of the previous games, and it might be the shortest in the entire series next to the original PS2 games and Dead Souls. So that was a bit disappointing. Regardless of all of that, it was still a good end to the Yakuza Kiryu era, and it makes me excited for Yakuza 7, that's for sure. At number 5 we have Yakuza Kiwami. This game is actually a remake of the original Yakuza, and boy oh boy does this game really improve on the original in so many aspects. The story is still pretty excellent, they've added some new scenes to try to add some more context, and that was nice. The combat has been completely replaced with Yakuza 0's combat and its 5 styles. And while some of the styles did definitely feel more useless than they did in 0, it's still a vast improvement over the original's combat. The city has been expanded on a little bit, and obviously is a major graphical upgrade because it's on the PS4 now as opposed to the PS2. However, all the sub-stories are really the same and lacking in quality, especially compared to later games in the series. It is really nice to see how far we've come in the series though from the original. One thing I can knock the game for is the music in this game is horrible. They completely removed the original soundtrack that was amazing. They didn't like remaster it or anything, no, they just added new music altogether. There might be 1 or 2 remixes in there, but that new music, it's terrible. It's like shockingly bad, and I thought that was like one of the best parts of the original game. The game is also one of the more challenging Yakuza games actually, and it can be a bit unfair almost at the beginning, especially to a newcomer. Of course, I didn't have any trouble with it, as I'm a Yakuza pro, but I could see someone having issues. As a whole, it was still a pretty good game, and definitely the definitive way to play the original game, and I'm sure there's mods for the PC version that let you add in the old music. So this would be the absolute definitive way to play the first Yakuza game, and yeah, it just really stomps a mud hole in the original. In the number 4 spot, we have Yakuza 4. This game is a huge improvement over the third game and was the first game to introduce multiple playable characters. There is still Kiryu, who plays rather similarly to how he did in Yakuza 3. There's Akiyama, who kicks everything imaginable. There is Saejima, who is a big powerhouse and can throw people around, and Tanimura, a somewhat corrupt cop who arrests people, actually. All 4 characters have extremely different playstyles and bring something totally unique to the table. While the game didn't add any new locations, it let you access more of the city, allowing you to go in the sewers and on the rooftops. The combat as a whole feels much smoother than it did in the previous games, and is all around better. The story was your kind of typical Yakuza affair in many aspects, but luckily all the new characters made it much more interesting than it has any right to be. However, Kiryu does almost nothing in this game, I will say. They really are trying to introduce and flesh out these new characters and their stories, and I'm glad that they did, because these characters would be all reoccurring characters minus Tanimura, and are some of the best characters in the series. Unfortunately, the graphics are still pretty bad, don't get me wrong, especially when they came out. I mean, the game looks slightly better than the third game, but yeah, no, it's still not good. And I haven't seen or played the PS4 version, so I don't know anything about that version's graphics. The frame rate also gave me some issues as well. Luckily, the music was actually passable, has a catchy tune or two here and there. The side content, decent enough as well. One reason the game is higher on the list is because this was when the game started getting quite long and really open. While the previous 3 games did have a decent amount of open world activities and exploration, this game really took it to another level and is significantly longer than the previous 3 games and has significantly more to find in this world. There's actually reason to explore and look around. Overall, I think it's a great game that shouldn't be missed. In the number 3 spot, we have Yakuza Kiwami 2. Like the first Kiwami, this game is just a huge improvement over the original PS2 game. This game obviously being a remake of Yakuza 2 and is the latest release in the series at this point in time. The game retains the amazing story of the second game with the excellent Ryuji Goda and now looks better than ever. The game runs on the Yakuza 6 engine and looks pretty excellent on all fronts. The combat is almost the same as the originals, but so much smoother and less jagged / clunky. The interesting eating system from Yakuza 6 returns as well. A lot of good sub-stories have been added to the game to make up for some of the lamer ones from the original game. They've actually added a lot of new side content to the game, including helping Majima with his construction process and new minigames. There's even like a 2-hour-ish playable section as Majima where he has his secret style from Yakuza 0. There is just a lot of improvements here. The leveling up system might be the same as Yakuza 6, but it's actually better implemented here. The heat moves were toned down from the original game, but I would still say they're pretty good looking. The only reason this game isn't higher up on the list is one part of the game specifically was changed from Yakuza 2, where they had this new mini area for like an hour, and it's been replaced with this section of the game that feels completely out of place and is just not as good. Also, music, again, nowhere near as good as the originals. Better than Kiwami 1's, but doesn't hold a candle to the original. Still, I love this game though, and seeing it in HD glory was pretty amazing, and it was really satisfying as a big fan of the series and the second game in particular. This spot was really hard, but my number 2 spot goes to Yakuza 0, the game that really got the series on the map and made it explode with popularity, and there is a reason. This game is excellent. This game takes place before Yakuza 1 when Kiryu was in his 20s actually. Additionally, it's not just Kiryu you get to play as you get to play as Goro Majima in a much better capacity than in Dead Souls, introducing 4 new styles to each of them, meaning there are 8 main styles of combat to choose from, giving you a lot of options. The combat in this game is just fantastic, and I had an absolute blast beating the crap out of everything imaginable. The story is easily the best story in the entire series, and has some amazing plot twists and turns. Like, you'll be hard-pressed to find anybody who thinks that this game isn't amazing, and its story. The way you level up is totally different from any other Yakuza game, as you use money to level up, so money is literally just flying out of people all the time in this game. The game is really quite long as well, around as long as Yakuza 4, and is expertly paced. The side content in this game is also really long, where Kiryu takes up property management and Majima becomes a cabaret club owner. While I wasn't a fan of Kiryu's, Majima's was a bit fun. The other sub-stories, great also. Lastly, the music, pretty kick-ass, all great 80s music. This game just kicks ass on almost every level. This is easily the ideal starting point for a new player of Yakuza, and I think that, yeah, that helps make it one of the best games in the franchise. But this is my list, and my absolute favorite is Yakuza 5. Yeah, my favorite Yakuza really is Yakuza 5. I remember for a time it was like the fabled Yakuza 5 that was amazing and wouldn't come out in America, but then it came out and I'm so glad it did, and now it's on PS4 to truly get the recognition it deserves. It was the first game on the new engine at the time, and as such looks alright even for the PS3. It's the only good looking Yakuza PS3 game, that's for sure. But no other Yakuza game offers up as much content, awesome content I might add, as this game. There is not 3, not 4, but 5 different playable characters. There is the favorite Kiryu, who still fights how you remember him. Akiyama returns and has some new tricks up his sleeve, that's for sure. Saejima comes back, and he's definitely a lot more fun in this game than he was in 4, with some great heat moves. And newcomer to the series, Shinada, who was a former baseball player but was kicked out under shady circumstances. All of his fighting is baseball related, and he's a really unique fighter. Then for the first and only time you get to play as Haruka, the girl Kiryu has taken care of for like 4 or 5 games now. Yes, she is here, and instead of fighting, she actually does dance-offs with people, and this is a rhythm game now. So yes, there's just a ton of different combat styles, just gameplay styles in this game. Every character minus Akiyama has a massive side activity that you can complete, with each one offering over 10 hours of gameplay. And these aren't just like throwaway side activities. These are like fully developed and are a blast to play. Kiryu is a taxi driver, there's a nice taxi game simulation that is fun. Then you get to do drag racing where it's like initial D serious drag racing. These are really fun, they control decently. Saejima has these extensive hunting missions when he hunts a killer bear. Shinada is playing baseball, that's fun. And Haruka has furthering her career as an idol, including fan signings, dance-offs with other idols, so much more. This game is absolutely brimming with good content, and I love it. The story, incredibly epic as well, with a huge overarching narrative over all the characters, and while I do think that towards the end of the game, the story loses its way and becomes a bit sloppy, a majority of the game it is great. The combat is great, feels nice, and looks awesome with some great heat moves. The music kicks ass as well, is one of my favorites in the series. There is just a lot of fan service in this game as well for longtime fans. The new locations are really nice, and the game is just one of the best open world games ever made. I think this game is a must play, but I will say that it's not as easy to get into as Zero, and you really need to play the previous 4 games if you want to get everything out of this game. Additionally, the end of this game is bittersweet. Speaking of the end, we're at the end of this video. That's my list of all the Yakuza games at this time, ranked. What a great franchise that is slowly but surely becoming milked. But still, there's a reason. It's fantastic. And that's why I had this list. Disagree with me? Of course you probably do. Why not tell me why I'm wrong and stupid in the comments? Why not dislike the video too? Liking, disliking, whatever it is, commenting, subscribing, it'd all be great. Have a nice Christmas, everyone. I'll see you guys hopefully for Yakuza 7.